I used to work as a Canadian border officer at a land crossing. One afternoon, a car with Michigan plates pulled up. The driver, a man in his mid-40s, handed me his driver's license. I asked for his passport. He blinked at me and said, completely serious, "Why would I need that? I'm not going overseas. I'm just going to Canada." I explained that Canada is a separate country. He frowned and pointed out the window. "It's literally right there. I can see it. I'm not flying anywhere. It's all North America. My license should cover that." He spent several minutes insisting we were violating his constitutional rights before being escorted away. My family once hosted an American exchange student from a small rural town. One evening, a news story about the Australian Prime Minister came on. He turned to my father and asked, "Wait, why does Australia have its own leader? Isn't the US president in charge of all the countries?" We tried explaining that different nations govern themselves. He struggled with the idea and finally said, "So they're not like states? I thought other countries were basically just states that don't want to admit it." I was working as a barista in Vienna when an American couple came in. I greeted them in English. The man smiled proudly at his wife and said, "See, I told you they'd speak English. They learn it just for us." Then he asked me, "So what do you speak here when tourists aren't around? Austrian?" When I told him the official language was German, he scoffed. "German? But Germany is a whole different place. That's like far away. You should really have your own language." That would make more sense. While working at a hotel in Paris, an American guest called the front desk in a panic. She said her charger didn't fit the wall and demanded to know why our outlets were wrong. I explained that Europe uses a different plug and voltage. She interrupted me and said, "Yeah, that's ridiculous. Electricity was invented in America. Our system is the standard. It's incredibly inefficient for every country to just make up their own version." She asked if we could update the wiring in her room immediately. I once joined a guided tour of the Roman ruins. An American man kept shaking his head as the guide spoke. Finally, he asked, "Why did they leave all this unfinished? Didn't they have architects?" The guide explained the buildings were thousands of years old and had deteriorated over time. The man muttered to his son, "This is why you need modern American engineering. Otherwise, everything just falls apart." A friend of mine is a flight attendant. On a flight to Australia in December, an American passenger called her over, confused. He pointed at the flight map and said, "It says it's summer there, but it's December." "December's winter." She explained the southern hemisphere. He shook his head and said, "That's not how calendars work. Someone messed up, probably the airline." I managed a bookstore in London when an American student brought up a copy of 1984. He asked, "Is this in English?" I said yes. He paused and asked, "But is it American English?" He explained he didn't want to deal with words like flat or lorry. He asked if we had a version properly translated. While hiking in the Swiss Alps, an American couple admired the scenery. The woman asked, "So who owns these mountains?" I said they're natural, part of the country. She followed up with, "Then who controls the waterfalls? Do they schedule them?" She seemed genuinely impressed and concerned about how much coordination that must take. I once overheard a conversation at a currency exchange in Tokyo. An American tourist asked why the money was called yen instead of Japanese dollars. He said it would be easier if every country just used dollars. He also complained that the exchange rate was unfair and should be one-to-one to keep things simple. I worked tech support when an American man called from Italy, furious that his laptop wouldn't connect to Wi-Fi. After troubleshooting, I realized he was trying to connect to his home router in Arizona. When I explained Wi-Fi has limited range, he yelled, "It's called the World Wide Web. It should work everywhere." At a pub in Dublin, an American tourist loudly ordered an Irish car bomb. My manager calmly explained why we don't use that name. The man rolled his eyes and said, "You guys really need to stop living in the past." He was asked to leave shortly after. I was a teaching assistant for a geography class in the US when a student asked, "Is Africa a country or just like a really big place?" When I explained it's a continent with over 50 countries, she said, "They should really label that better. It's confusing." At the Louvre, I saw an American family staring at the Mona Lisa. The father said, "That's it?" The daughter added, "She doesn't even look happy. If you're going to paint someone, at least give them some personality." They took a selfie and complained the museum didn't have enough escalators. I once had to explain to an American co-worker that England, Scotland, and Northern Ireland are different countries. He argued that they all count as England because they're close together and used to have the same queen. In Florence, an American tourist asked me where to find deep dish pizza. When I explained it's an American invention, he looked disappointed and said, "You guys created pizza and then just gave up?" He asked for the nearest Domino's. On a boat tour in Vietnam, an American woman told the guide the islands were wasted potential and suggested adding resorts, water parks, and golf courses. The guide simply smiled and nodded. My cousin married an American and moved to Texas. Her husband explained gun culture by saying Winiak were the only truly free country. He was confused why Europeans didn't feel oppressed without personal weapons. I worked at a hotel in Iceland during winter when an American guest complained that the sun hadn't risen yet at 11 a.m. When I explained polar night, he said, "That sounds made up." An American backpacker once told me soccer was becoming popular thanks to American influence. The Brazilians and Germans he was speaking to just stared at him in silence. On a train in Europe, an American marveled at how close countries were and asked if people ever accidentally crossed borders and got in trouble. At the Acropolis, an American tourist asked if ancient Greeks spoke Greek. When told yes, he asked how they wrote anything since Greek letters are just for fraternities. In a Swiss cheese shop, an American complained the cheese didn't have holes and accused Switzerland of sending the real stuff only to America. My college roommate once spun a globe, landed on Russia, and said, "That's way too big. They don't need all that. The US should have some of it." I used to work as a Canadian